interesting. His arms and his legs were as long as each other. They probably walked around on all fours. But the weird thing was he didn't really hang from trees. He walked across the branches more so than hanging from trees. And the reason we know that is his hands and his feet were more designed for walking on top of something more so than hanging from something. And the weird thing is, because we know by his body design that he walked around in trees, we also tells us a little bit about the area of the time that he lived in. So everybody knows about dinosaurs, right? All right. What happened to the dinosaurs? They got extinct. Boy, it'd be so cool to see a few today. Okay? Not up close, of course, but they went extinct about 65 million years ago. And the weird thing is, even though all the dinosaurs went extinct and a whole bunch of life went extinct, a few things lived through. Just a few. And one of those things was monkeys. One of those things were things called lemurs, and then a thing called tarsiers, and sharks. A lot of ocean creatures survived. But only about 25% of all life lived through it. So 75% of the things that were around went away. Now, the things that lived, though, on land, that survived that 65 million ago, they were little bitty things. Everything that was little were the things that survived. So we had little monkeys, little lemurs, little guys that survived. And they got bigger and bigger and bigger until they became this guy. And this guy's important because this is the first guy, the first type of monkey fossil that we can find that started to have teeth like us. So what would be a really good paleoanthropologist? What's a good thing to learn about if you wanted to be a paleoanthropologist? Teeth, that's right. What do we call people who study teeth? Who takes care of our teeth? That's right. With a toothbrush, that's right. That's true. You get a toothbrush. What's that doctor called? A dentist. It's kind of a funny thing because people who originally dug up dinosaur bones, pretty much all of them were dentists. The guys who were digging up all these ancient apes, they were dentists. And they began to call themselves, because they weren't being taken seriously, like, why is a dentist digging up the Eosimids or whatever? But they were, okay, I'm not a dentist, I'm an anatomist. I study the physiological body. Well, no, I study animals, I'm not a dentist. No, but if you look at all the degrees, they all say dentist on the paper. And it's because dentists knew almost right away when they looked at something, they said, those are human teeth. What happened? Because monkey teeth are definitely different. I'm going to show you that. So one of these famous dentists, his name, well actually we're going to start with one guy first. Has everybody ever heard of the term called evolution? Evolution. Now, evolution is kind of a weird thing, but that's what we live in. We live in a world that evolves. In other words, I am who I am today, but a couple million years from now, I'm going to be something different. Okay? So we all started somewhere, like as a monkey, and we became an ape, and then we went from there. We learned to stand upright, we learned to walk, and then we became the people that we are today, and then we're going to go some other direction. The thing that causes that change is usually something in the environment. So the world. So there's usually some type of volcano or something that goes off, or a meteor hits, something that causes a big change. And only a few type of people who have the ability to survive and live, and then everybody else perishes. Okay? So Eosimius, the little monkey, the monkey that was about this big, evolved into this guy here. And then scientists really began to realize that, you know what, we think evolution is true. Does anybody know the name of the guy who came up with the idea of evolution? You want to take a guess? Darwin. Yes. You knew that? Nice. All right. There's a guy named Darwin. Now, Darwin was actually a high-ranking church official. He belonged to the church. And the church said, look, there's a whole lot of things being discovered here. We really want to know, what are they? What are they? And there's this guy, he's going to be going on this big boat all the way around the world to trade with India. And he's going to be stopping everywhere. We want you to go with him as his friend and learn about everything. And we want to hear your ideas of where everything came from. So Darwin was kind of a funny guy. He tried to be a doctor, and then when they were trying to teach him to operate, guess what he did? His dad was a doctor. Guess what he did when he saw his first operation? What do you That's right. The poor guy fainted. And then he tried to be a priest. He said, I'm going to be a priest because I'm already part of the church and everything. And no, he didn't do very well. I couldn't remember everything. I didn't remember the stories and stuff like that. So he gave up being a priest. So he just became part of the church. He helped fund it. He became very active. But he became very smart in geology. He understood rocks and stuff. So he got on the boat with the guy and he started going around the world. And then he came across a thing called the Galapagos Islands. Right? So we've seen the big tortoises, big giant tortoises, Galapagos tortoises. They're really big. But the other thing he noticed were finch. And he said, you know what, these finch look really familiar. These look like the finch that are from Africa. But the islands are way over here. How did they get over here? Well, we found out that the winds, things like that, kind of blow in the islands. It still happens even today. You'll see a new fish from there, they're going over here. But after a certain generation, after generation, after generation, they begin to change because their food is different. So only ones with narrow beaks can eat the food, or only ones with short beaks can eat the food, so they begin to change. Now, Darwin knew right away that something called evolution was going on. So he knew about it a long time ago, but he didn't want to tell anybody because they would have hurt a lot of people's feelings. So he didn't tell anybody. For 30 years, he knew the answers. And what he did is he went home and he started raising pigeons. So he raised all the pigeons and he started breeding them in certain directions. Like, who has a dog here? Okay. Now, did you know that there was only one type of dog, basically a wolf, 10,000 years ago? But now when you look around the world, we have Chihuahuas, we have St. Bernards, we've got Shar-Peis, we've got Catahoubas, we've got all these German Shepherds. They all came from that one type of wolf. So if you saw the wolf and you saw a Chihuahua, it's basically they bred that wolf to look like a Chihuahua. And that's evolution. We're controlling it. We're controlling the direction it's going. But that's basically a method of evolution. Or how about pufferfish? Have you ever seen a pufferfish in a freshwater tank? Pufferfish are from saltwater. Yeah, they're supposed to be saltwater, but someone took a whole bunch of pufferfish, put them in this halfway freshwater saltwater tank, and the ones that lived, they let them populate, and they took those ones and put them in freshwater, and then a few lived, and they populated. This is a different fish than it was before, but now this fish can live in freshwater, and it can't live in saltwater. That's evolution. That's what was happening. So Darwin knew this, but he didn't want to tell anybody. So he waited about 30 years, and he finally told everybody. And guess what? You would think the church would be mad, but they're the ones that said, yes, that's right. Guess what all the scientists said? No, you're wrong. So the scientists were saying he was wrong, and he was like, I didn't expect that. He thought it would be the other way around. He thought he would have a problem with the church, and not a problem with the scientists. All the scientists said he was wrong, and he had to explain it himself, and he had to prove it over and over again. But someone said evolution, because he was only talking about animals. He wasn't talking about people. People evolved, do we? We do. So someone got the idea and said, wait a minute. People evolve? Is that what you're saying? And he's like, not directly. And so someone took conspiracy and said, well, let's prove it. So this one guy goes, he says, look, I'm going to prove it. So he goes to Asia and he starts to dig. Guess what he did for a living? He's a dentist. He's a dentist. The dentist says, I'm going to prove it. So he goes to Asia. And so he starts to dig, and he finds a guy called... I think so. This is who we call the Peking man. So he comes from Asia, and the dentist went and found one of these things. And he said, look what I found. And everybody says, no way. That's a monkey. No way. He goes, no. And he said, look at the teeth. He says, this is not you're right, it's not a person. But it's an early version of a person. You can tell by the teeth. And you know what they said? What are you, a dentist? No, I'm an anatomist. I study life and animals and body parts. I don't study just teeth, but I know an awful lot about it. Don't look at my diploma. So he was an anatomist. He was able to tell by the teeth. And this guy originally, though, just to make everybody feel better, he called it, he named it after an ape. So he didn't have the name that it has now. Well, caveman, but he called it, what do you call a can, which means ape, ape man, it looks like an ape. But he didn't want to say it was actually a human. So he called it that. And then someone else said, okay, so all of this guy here is in Asia, that's probably where the apes live at. But some other guy said, well, I think it seems like most of the apes live in Africa. I think if I was a man, that's where I would have come from. So guess what he did for me? He was a dentist. But see, nobody liked this guy because he was really smart. This guy was brilliant. And he had a tendency to be too smart for everybody. So he was in England, and he was a dentist, and he actually did study other things. He was learning about the human body. He was going to be a medical doctor and stuff like that. But England got so tired of him that they said, you know what, you want to go to Africa? We're going to send you there. He's like, wait. But they sent him there, and he was to take care of the hospital there. And when he got there was no hospital. It was just a dirt field, and he was expected to turn it into a hospital. And he started to do that. But then he said, you know what, while I'm here, I'll start to dig. So he started to dig. And he ended up finding the little tiniest thing. And what was amazing about this, the reason he was able to find this, is there was a big mountainside, and they were looking at the concrete, limestone. They were going to build some buildings, and they were digging at it. And he heard people talking about these weird bones that he was finding. And so he asked, hey, can you send me just some crates full of your rock? And the poor guy's like, this guy wants to buy our loose rock, but this guy is cute. What is he, a dentist? And so they put all of the rock, as they're digging, they put a whole bunch of rock and they shipped it to him. The funny thing is they shipped it to him on the day that his best friend was going to be married. So on the day that his best friend was being married, he was going to be the best man. He was putting on his suit. The ceremony was about to begin in an hour. These crates arrive on his doorstep. He starts taking off his suit, and he starts going through the rock. He starts digging away. To his astonishment, though, within minutes, he saw this skull sticking out of there. And he says, oh no, this is unbelievable. And then you know what the guy getting married said? Oh no, this is unbelievable. So he goes, look, hey, we got to come, you got to get me married here. He said, okay, we move that on. And he runs off and gets his friend married. Sort of waiting comes on back. And then he goes, this is definitely, look at the teeth, because he was a dentist. Look at the teeth, and you can tell that this seems like it's really good. Yeah, he's got the right teeth. But you know what everybody said this was? Nobody believed them. They said it was a chimpanzee. And he says, no, it's not a chimpanzee. I'm sure of that. So we're going to go look at chimpanzee. Gnarly canines on the back. These teeth point forward. These teeth point upward. The molars aren't flat and worn. They're getting there. So it's definitely an early phase. But looking at these two mouths, they're definitely different. And you say it is not a chimpanzee, it's something else. And the sad part is, a lot of the scientists back then, nobody believed him. He couldn't prove it. Scientists made fun of him. They didn't listen to him anymore, even though he was touring all over Europe to prove it. Until this one guy came along. This guy, he used to be a dinosaur. He was a dinosaur, and they already knew about dinosaurs. So he was a dinosaur digger, and he came up to the guys, and he went to his house. He knocked on the door. So Mr. DuBois opened the door, and the dinosaur digging scientist pushed him aside, walked in, and he literally walked right to the guy's house. He found the skull, and he kneeled to her. He says, my great ancestor. And then so the guy's like, who are you? He goes, my name is this, I dig dinosaur bones. I believe you. And the guy's like, no. You believe me? He goes, yeah, I believe you. I'm here to help. Go how can you help? Tell me where you found them. And the guy, so he told him where he found them. And literally, this guy took an army and went in and started digging into the mountain. And he didn't find just one. He would find more. And suddenly all the scientists said, okay, we believe you. We believe this is really something other than a chimpanzee. Okay, so now we have a thing. This guy here, we're going to give you a couple of names to say. Okay? A little bit tough on the name. I'll say it once and then I'll have you say it. So we're going to say the first part first. Australia, like the place Australia, the sea. This is the sea. So Australia, this is the sea. Ready? Australia, this is the sea. Wow! Right on the button. And then to Australia, this is the sea. Now that basically means southern Asia. Now the word that tells us who this guy is Africanus. Okay, so let's say that. Africanus. How about you? You want to say Africanus? How about this? You guys want to touch him? That's an Australopithecine Africanus. So, but this guy turns out he was just a baby. He was just a young kid. And then they also found grown-up versions of this too. So we know what they look like, and they definitely don't look like a chimpanzee. Okay, so Australopithecine. And then the other guy, they decided, okay, so he's not an ape. So we're going to call this guy Paranthropus erectus. But later on, we changed that to Homo erectus. Homo meaning human. So this was considered one of the first people. Okay? So that was important. Now the next thing, there was a scientist. How many have heard of this guy? Louis Leakey. He's a famous guy from Africa. Same kind of a similar story to Darwin. He was going to go, his father was a minister, he was going to go into being a minister, but then the church came to him and said, look, we have enough ministers, everybody's digging up these dinosaur bones, we need to make sure we keep everybody honest to what they are. So we want you to go see a dinosaur or a caveman over here. And so he goes, okay, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. And then the first thing he did is he couldn't find any human bones or anything, but he kept finding these weird rocks. And I probably lost my weird rocks. Okay. Everywhere he went, he would find fossil bones of animals, and then he would find all these rocks lying around. And the rocks were weird because they weren't rocks from where he was. These rocks were from someplace miles away, and they were all broken up. So you kept saying, well, what are these weird rocks I keep finding? So this is like way back in the 1930s. So we're in 2013 now. So almost 80 years ago, he kept finding these rocks everywhere. In the area he was looking at, is a place called Woodland. They kept finding all these rocks. They were broken. They seem to have worn edges. We're going to pass this around.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Actually,
Yep, they are strange, aren't they? Very strange. Yep. That is, yeah, really. So he started finding all these broken rocks everywhere, and he realized that they had worn edges on them, and he realized that they were probably, and you can see the straight marks on the bones. So the rocks he were finding is what we call Woodland tools. He said these are caveman tools. So they're just going to pass around the caveman so we can fill the edge. It's a little sharp, but not too sharp. So these were the first tools that our ancestors used. So a long time ago. So where we use screwdrivers today and hammers today, they would have used these. And they probably used them for very practical things, like for taking meat off bone and things like that, for maybe cleaning up plants, crushing up plants, and so on. That's one of the very first tools. Now the next thing he did is he started finding rocks that seemed to be even more carved out. So they seem to have gotten better. And the places he found these at were different places than when he was finding those. And then he began to realize that cavemen figured out how to chip the rock and make it into tools. So he thought this was the tool. He found a whole bunch of these. But someday later, someone else came by and said, you know what? This probably isn't the best tool. But the pieces that broke off were probably the better tool. So in other words, he had rocks like this. They weren't really sharp enough, but the pieces that broke off were sharp enough. So they were probably grabbing the bigger rocks, breaking off little pieces so that they could clean up the bones and the plants and stuff like that. So this is called a pulley. So these are the next tools that were made. And then finally, he started finding other tools, but he still couldn't find anybody that belonged to them. He couldn't find who made all these tools. He didn't find any bones. But these are way, way before Indians. Yeah. Long time. And these would all be in Africa. So he spent all his time in Africa. So finally he started finding tools like this. And this is actually a lot like an arrowhead. Yeah. So he found things like this. And this is obviously made by somebody. Go ahead and pass this one around. Yes, sir. You have a real arrowhead? Nice. Now this is what he decided to call Mousterian. So that's a Mousterian tool. And that would be even later time. So finally, after 30 years of looking, he found so many tools, he finally found his first haul. The funny thing is, it wasn't he that found it. Guess who found it? His son. Dad, what's this? Actually, technically, they found what they thought was part of a tooth. He and his wife Mary thought they found part of the tooth. And then the next day they thought they'd go out looking again. And Lewis was a little sick, he was a little tired that day. So Mary and the son went out and they're walking around, and then Mary's looking over here, and little Johnny looks over here and he says, hey, what's this? And what he found was a thing like this. We're going to touch this guy here. This guy here is what is called Homo habilis. So let's all say that together. Homo habilis. All right, we're going to say it one more time together. Ready? Homo habilis. Now, Homo habilis, what made this guy so cool is, this is the first guy we consider part of the human race. Everybody else we kind of consider apes. So anything older than this didn't really have a big enough brain, and the face wasn't quite right. But we can go ahead and we can touch him. Johnny found this, and they ended up nicknaming it. Right? True. They nicknamed him Johnny's Child. Johnny's Child. This is Homo habilis. And he lived about 2.5 million years ago. So a long time ago, 2.5 million years. So that seems like the beginning. Now, did this guy walk on 2 feet? You don't think so? Yeah? Now, the funny thing is he actually did. He walked on 2 feet. He had free hands. And he was the guy that made these tools. So they actually, when they started finding him and they started to realize what time frame to find him at, they could now look across that time frame and they would find this tool with this guy. Right. Oh, and the way they can tell the difference in time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Let's see that stuff.
Yeah, we can talk after. But the way they can tell, there's 2 things that was going on. First of all, Africa has a lot of volcanic activity. There's a lot of volcanoes going on. Volcanoes, lava, that's this ground. Lava rock. Lava is kind of weird because lava is made up of a lot of potassium, but potassium is not very stable and it turns into a gas. So So they can actually measure the amount of gas and realize how old this piece of lava rock is. So they can measure that. So it's kind of a weird process, but that's one of the ways they can tell time. So the lava rock that they found the skull, the lava was just under this lava, they measured this lava and they knew that this guy was older than this. That's true. You can use that to reheat it, right? Absolutely right. So they know that this lava rock was a certain age by the amount of gas that it's turned into. So argon gas. And then that tells us how old this is. Now the weird thing is, the bad part is what happens is that sometimes there's a skull and it's not found in the original spot. So in other words, waters come by and it washed that skull out of the original spot that it was. And now we don't know where it was actually, how old it is, because it's somewhere else. So when we look at this guy here, the original surface, this is called C2. Let's all say that together. C2. C2. Ready? C2. So when they find a fossil that's in the original rock, that's called C2. And that's good, because then we can find this rock, compare it, figure out where it is in that lava rock. Now, if this was to fall out of this, we wouldn't know what rock it came from. So now we no longer know what time frame it's in. So you run into a lot of that in Africa because it's all being exposed by winter times. So C2 is really important. And fortunately, they found this guy in a pretty good spot at C2, and they found the stone. So now, when we look at the bones, though, this is kind of what happens. We have Africanus, we have Homo habilis, and then this guy is younger. So oldest, middle, youngest. So this guy here is the closest one to us. So then the next guy comes along. There's a whole bunch of arguments in England. Everybody thinks that man came from England. Back then they did. And it wasn't. The original first find of cavemen was actually found on a mountain in Germany. So the very first skull that they found of a caveman was in a cave in Germany. Now this cave, though, was weird about it was 60 feet up in a mountain, and it was so it was very hard to actually get up into. And when they found it, they found something like this, and his bones were so big and so thick, and he was really, really big, huge guy. And they said, "This isn't a person." Guess what they thought it was? They thought it was a bear. They found a bear skeleton. So they got excited. It's a bear. And so this is back like just before Darwin talked about evolution. So about 4 years before Darwin said, "Hey, here's evolution." Someone found this, what they thought was a bear. So they took that bear skeleton and they put it away. And so they never thought about it. And then Darwin came out and said this, and then the guy said, "Hey, does that mean man too?" And everybody said, "No." And then someone remember that bear we found? And they didn't know what it was in Germany. And they said, "Oh yeah, we're by the Neanderthal river." Yeah, you know. They went and found it, and the scientists looked at it. And this is one of the first things that proved before Darwin. They looked at it and they said, "Oh no, it's not a bear. It's actually a person." And because they found it by the Neanderthal river, that's what they named it. Neanderthal, right. So they actually had found Neanderthal, but they didn't know. They thought it was a bear. It's so big and powerful. Now Neanderthals are cool because they are big and burly. Now Neanderthal, I'm describing, ready? Neanderthal is about 5'8", about as tall as me. He probably had very light skin, just like me. He probably had short fingers, just like me. He had teeth, just like me. Wait a minute, does that mean I'm Neanderthal? What do you guys think? You know what's funny? I'm actually 4% Neanderthal. 4%. So they've done studies now where they've done genetic testing. They took some samples of some of the Neanderthals. And Neanderthals, you have to understand, they didn't just find one or two. They have well over 400 skeletons, family of Neanderthals, so they know exactly who they were, what they looked like, and what they did. But they did DNA studies, and they show that Homo sapien and Neanderthal share about 92% of the same DNA, so they're both from the same original person, same creature. And then there's about an 8% variation between the two. The two can mix, but there's enough to tell the difference. So that 8%. So of that 8%, half of it, that 4%, you can actually find in me. So they know I'm actually descended from Neanderthals. So anybody with light skin is pretty much known to be part of Neanderthal. If you have dark skin, you're either Homo sapien or you're Homo erectus. And that blending of people is still going on today. So they want to say Neanderthals are extinct, Homo erectus are extinct, and it's not true. We're just in a blending mode. So as we travel more and more, we go between Asia and so on. We're actually beginning to still change our human race. So we're not really what we're meant to be yet. We're still in a changing process. So it's kind of a weird process. But Neanderthal, he was like one of the first to be discovered, and they thought he was a bear. So we're going to put him over here. Okay? So this guy here, once we figured out what this guy was, we changed this guy's name. We decided he was no longer an age, because if this guy's a Homo sapien or a Homo species, this guy's Homo Neanderthal, this guy's Homo habilis, well, this guy is a step between us. So we know that this guy must be some type of Homo, so we call him Homo erectus, which means he walks upright. Now, you had mentioned that this guy didn't walk, right? I mean, I mentioned that he does. People actually started walking about 6 million years ago. And it's one of the big differences. So there was a creature that was a lot like this. And this guy's a descendant from the chimpanzees. Their evolution went this direction, whereas this guy's evolution went this direction. And one of the big differences between the two is this guy stood upright. This guy decided to stay in the trees. Correct. Exactly. So if I went to him, proconsul was about 20 million years ago, then we were having trouble finding stuff between 20 and 6 million years ago. There's not a whole lot of stuff that we found. When we get into about 6 million years ago, we start to find other guys, and by this time, we can see that they were walking. And the reason why we know they're walking, just before this guy, there's a famous person. Okay, we're going to talk about a guy named Donald Johanson. Donald Johanson, have you heard of him? Okay, because this is way cool. American scientists have done a lot for paleontology. Donald Johanson was a professor at Berkeley, California College for years. So right here in California is where he did all his studies. And he worked with a guy named Tim White. Many years ago, though, when he first started out as a professor, he took his people, they all went to Africa to see if they could find something. And he was working with some people, the Leakeys, back with Louis Leakey and so on. And then he got invited to join the French people over here that were doing some digging. And one day out with them, he found this young lady skull who was called Lucy. So if you remember her name, Lucy, she was a creature called Afarensis. So Australopithecines afarensis. They found a whole bunch of them, but the one thing that they found that was really cool, as far as walking goes, there was a lava, there was a volcano that erupted during her time. And then it left a real thick mud of ash. And they actually found her footsteps, or not hers, but her people's footsteps. There was a bigger one, which we assume was a male. There was a smaller feet, which we assume was a female. And then there was a little child's feet. And there was actually 3 of them walking across the lava. And they left their footprints in the lava. About halfway across the walk, a little kid's feet disappeared. They kept walking. And you see them reappear. They started walking. So once they got too muddy or slippery. But Louis Leakey, his wife, Mary Leakey, was the one that found these footprints. And I mentioned that Donald Johanson worked in Berkeley. His friend was Tim White. Tim White was the guy that was assigned to clear the path so you could see his feet really well. So he went and cleaned them all. But they did not walk or they did not stop. They completely had perfect footsteps. So this was 3.5 million years ago, and they walked perfectly. So it seems like the very first thing that we did as people, we learned to walk. And that's probably because back on this side of it, it was a lot of forest, real wet, a lot of trees, and then things began to dry out. And as things dried out, we had to leave the trees and we had to start walking across savannas and stuff like that in order to get our food. So that's how we got into we ended up learning to walk. And that was probably the first thing that we learned to do. And I did mention, to show you how hard it is, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to do a little game, and we're going to surprise us if that's all right. But one of the hard things for scientists, I mentioned that they found a little bit too. When they're digging, a lot of times they have no idea what they're going to find. So they'll find a fragment. They can tell us too. So there's just a whole bunch of little fragments. So they might find that little tiny piece right there. And they're going to say, hey, there's something here. We found something. And so then they'll come back with more people, and then they have to sit in the sand and dig and dig and dig. And until they find maybe another piece and another piece and another piece. And if all goes well, they eventually find a skull, bone, wrist. And that's actually what happened with Homo erectus. This guy here, they actually found pretty much 70% of his skeleton in one time. So now we know exactly what Homo erectus looks like. Now here's the thing. Back in the day, when we first started out, they were probably about this tall. So Homo habilis, the boys were about a foot taller. The girls were short. They were about 2-3 feet, 2.5 feet, 3 feet. The boys were about 3 feet, 3.5 feet. And then, so that's with these guys here. By the time we got here, you think all cavemen were short? It's amazing. They're not. What's amazing is when we got to Homo erectus, and we didn't realize it when we were digging up in China, we went back and looked, and we said, oh my gosh, is it true? Because when we found the one full skeleton, we realized that that skeleton was a skeleton of a boy who was 9 years old. Guess how tall he was? He was tall as me. And then we realized that when we looked at grown adult, Homo erectus were easily 6 feet to 6'5", almost all of them. They were tall people. They were very slim. They had really slim heads, but they were incredibly tall. So Homo erectus, we went from being these little 3-foot guys, just by learning how to walk and to move through land and whatever, we got really tall. The other thing that happened though, back when we were little guys, we didn't move around much. We stayed in the one area. When we suddenly got tall, we decided, you know what? It's time to leave Africa. And the Homo erectus people were the first ones to leave Africa. And that's why we find it in Asia, Europe, and so on. So, can you imagine being that tall? And then what happens?
How old are you?
So 1 year older than you, and you'd be as tall as me. Can you imagine? And they were all, when they went back and measured the bones, they said, oh my gosh, they're all over 6 feet. And the funny thing is, this is how funny people are. They didn't want to accept, when they did the measurements, all of them were about 6'3". That can't be true. We must be doing something wrong. So they say, we'll say the average is 5'11", just to make everybody feel better. But every single bone they find, every person measures out to about 6'3", 6'5". It's ridiculous how tall these people are. These guys would be, they would have been 1.8 million years ago to they were. So it's kind of a weird process that enormously tall people. Now here's what happens. The world causes us to be certain heights and certain dimensions. In other words, Homo erectus was tall because it was probably very hot. Tall people that are really lanky release heat really well. It's hot. They sweat well, and they can walk and they can do things. They can travel really well without overheating. you live in the Ice Age, which is something that came and changed a lot of them, the Ice Age were there. Oh, perfect. Yes, Ice Age. When the Ice Age came, the people, the Homo erectus that lived in Europe changed. Guess what happened to them when they evolved? What happened to them, you think? They got shorter. The shorter and stocky means you retain meat better. So you keep your meat better. If you're tall and lanky, you release heat. If you're short and stocky, you keep your heat. So that's like if you look at like the Eskimo people, shorter, stocky. Neanderthals were the same thing. The Homo erectus became the Neanderthal people who got short and stocky. During the Ice Age, where it stayed warm in Africa, there was a different change that happened. They did get shorter, but they stayed thin. And those became what they call Homo sapiens. Okay? Now, do you know what Homo sapiens is? Homo sapiens. You know what Homo sapiens? We are. It's kind of a little bit weird, but we're actually a thing called Homo sapiens sapien. So we're two things, Homo sapiens sapien, which means wise man. So we're really, I don't know how they came up with that idea. We also came